Thank you all so much for having me here today. It's an absolute honor, it's an absolute pleasure to be here at your kickoff event, to spend this next hour with you, to share about a topic which is very close to my heart, and that is about motivation. As Ernest mentioned just now, I've authored 2 books before. This is my new book. It's called The Sales Rejection Paradox. And I've been going around for since the end of last year, actually, for final sprints and kickoff, sharing a lot about dealing with rejections. But today, while I am going to be touching a little bit about dealing with rejections, the topic is actually going to go a little bit deeper than just rejections. It's going to come to motivation, all right? Because it's the start of the year, and all of us are here for kickoff event to get our motivation up so that we can achieve all the goals that we're setting for ourselves by the end of the year. Okay, so before I get started, I want to ask each and every one of you 2 of my favorite questions. Okay, the first question is this: how many of you here believe that motivation is important for people in sales? Just raise your hands. All right? I want to have a feel of the room. All right, so I would say majority believes that motivation is important when you're in sales. My second question is this: how many of you here believe that you are someone who is easy to be motivated and very easy to stay motivated all year long? All right? Good. 1. All right? 2. All right? And this is the reality of it. Okay? Majority of the people will find that it is hard to stay motivated all year round, be perpetually motivated. Some people have their systems, right? They have their routines, they know how to be motivated, they know what triggers their motivation. But most people understand the fact that motivation is important, but don't know how to stay motivated all year long, right? And that's what I'm here to share with you with a little bit more today. Okay? I want to start off by sharing about a very classic story. Most of us would have grown up, would have heard this story while we were growing up, but there is an important lesson in this story that ties back to motivation. And this is the story of the tortoise and the hare, right? Because most of us would have heard it, but for the benefit of those who have not heard it before, I'm going to share it with you again. So as we know, the story of the tortoise and the hare is the tortoise and the hare decided to have a race against each other. The hare was obviously the favorite to win because the hare is faster, right? The hare is stronger, and the hare has a lot more energy than the tortoise. So the hare was the clear favorite, and the tortoise knew this. But having said that, the tortoise still agreed to race. So they were at the start line, and as the guns fired off, the hare went blasting away to the front. Okay? Obviously, the hare went really fast, leaving the tortoise in its dust. Before you knew it, the hare could not even see the tortoise anymore. The tortoise just focused on what it needed to do, which was 1 step at a time, even though it could see that the hare was leaving it far ahead, right? So, the hare ran, and it ran, and it ran, and before you knew it, the hare could not even see the tortoise anymore. The hare knew that it was going to win. There's actually no way it can lose, right? Because it's much faster. The hare felt safe. In fact, the hare felt really, really safe. Okay? And then came this beautiful lavender field, right? And the hare saw this lavender field, and it was just blown away by how beautiful it was. Okay? The hare looked at it and said, hey, maybe I should stop and take a break. All right? After all, I am far ahead. I am far ahead of the tortoise, and there's no way the tortoise can catch up with me. So what's the harm in taking a short break, enjoying this beautiful scene, and just chilling for a while before I continue back on my journey? And that's what the hare did. The hare stopped, played in that lavender field to its heart's content, and once it was done playing, the hare just wanted to have a seat somewhere and just soak it all in. After all, it's a beautiful lavender field, right? So the hare found a nice tree, sat down just to take a break, but without realizing it, the hare went to sleep. The hare did not plan to sleep. All he had planned was for a break. So coming back to the tortoise was still doing what tortoise does, right? Slow, steady, one step at a time. One step at a time. It didn't know where the hare was. It didn't even know if the hare had already finished the race, but the tortoise kept doing what the tortoise does. Slow, steady, one step at a time. Before we realized it, the tortoise had caught up with the hare because the hare was sleeping under the tree. The tortoise saw the same lavender field. The tortoise was blown away by the same lavender field because it's beautiful. But the tortoise decided not to stop. The tortoise felt that it was moving at a slow enough pace for it to both enjoy the lavender field but still keep to its journey. And that's what the tortoise did. It kept moving forward, one step at a time, slow and steady. After a while, the hare woke up from its sleep. All right? The tortoise, long gone. Hare woke up from its sleep, and the hare did not know that the tortoise had already passed. The hare thought it was still ahead. So the hare got up and said, you know what, I'm going to go back on my journey. But the difference is the hare wasn't as motivated. It wasn't as energetic. It was feeling a little sluggish. Right? We've all felt that before, right? After waking up from a nap. There's always that moment. It takes some time before the engine gets started again. Some of us need a cup of coffee. Some of us need some fresh air. But hardly ever we wake up from sleep feeling full of energy. Right? And that's what the hare felt. But the hare was like, you know what? I'm going to win this race. So it just continued its journey. But it was not running like how it was running before. It was strolling this time, thinking it's going to win. So to its surprise, when the hare reached the finish line, it realized that the tortoise had already crossed the finish line. Right? And the hare was shocked. So most people, when they hear this story, right, people assume or think that the lesson of this story is about not being overconfident and not getting sucked into distractions. But there is a bigger lesson here that we can learn. And the lesson is about consistency. All right? And to be more specific, the lesson is consistency under boredom, under doubt, and under silence. Boredom is when we are either far away ahead of the pack or far behind the pack. All right? Doubt is when we don't see results. Silence is when we are putting in the work, but we don't see the recognition yet. Boredom tempts you to slow down. Doubt tempts you to question yourself. And silence tempts you to stop. Consistency ignores all of these three things. All right? In sales, the hare represents motivation. Oops. In sales, the hare represents motivation. High energy days bring about strong confidence and big actions. But low motivation days, low energy days, bring about low motivation and minimal effort. The tortoise represents consistency. Same routine, same action, same steps, despite conditions. So let me ask you something. And once again, I want you to answer with honesty. Right? How many of you would like to be the tortoise? Someone who can bring in consistent results, day in, day out, year in, year out. Okay? But how many of you are told to be the hare? Full of motivation and to be perpetually motivated. And therein lies the problem with motivation. See, motivation is an emotion, and motivation is unreliable. Motivation comes in spikes. And day in, day out, people in sales are told to be perpetually motivated, but And emotion is not a perpetual state. Emotions require triggers, and I'm going to touch on this a little bit more later. All right? So if you are relying on motivation, then it's going to come in spikes. And when motivation decreases, effort decreases as well. All right? Talking about motivation and consistency. Right? There's another story I want to share with you. And this is a personal story of mine. Right? In 2002, it was September 2002, while I was roaming around South America for about 3 months. The pandemic had just ended, and we were all locked within our houses and in Singapore for such a long time. The moment doors opened up and borders opened up, I jumped on a plane and I went traveling for about 9 months. And in this 9 months, I spent 3 months in South America. One of the highlights of that 3 months was my trip to Machu Picchu. All right? It's a beautiful trek. It's something that everyone should go and experience it, all right? Because it's just amazing. All right? So there are many ways you can get to Machu Picchu. All right? There is where you can take the train and the bus directly to the doorsteps of Machu Picchu, or you can hike and trek to Machu Picchu. There is a 1-day trek, there is a 4-day trek, and there is a 5-day trek as well. So I chose the 4-day trek, where it's considered the scenic route. We still have to go through a lot of mountains, a lot of passes for 4 days before we get to Machu Picchu. And one of the highlights of that Machu Picchu trip was on day 2, when we trekked to that mountain there called Salkantay. All right, so Salkantay is it's more than 4,300 meters. I think it should be about 5,000 meters. And this was the highlight of day 2. So we started off from our camp early in the morning, and it was going to be a 4-hour trek all the way to Salkantay, and then another 4-hour trek to the next camp before we start day 3. This journey was tough. Right? As you can see, it looks like a lot of flat surface, but we are about 4,000 meters above sea level. The air is a lot thinner. It's harder to breathe. It's simply because our body is not used to that kind of altitude. It takes about 2.5 to 3 months to fully acclimatize into high altitude situation. And before that, fitness has nothing to do with this. Fitness will carry you a certain distance, but if you overexert yourself, you can get altitude sickness and you can die of altitude sickness. Right? So it's not easy hiking at such high altitude. And on top of that, it is still steep. Right? While it may look flat, as you can see, there are a lot of different terrains that you need to go and cross over before you can get to Salkantay itself. There are parts where we need to go over a smaller mountain and get down that mountain to continue on the trek. Sometimes we need to go around. Eventually, we did reach this point, which is the highest point we are allowed to get to at Salkantay, which is 4,300 meters above sea level. We are not allowed to summit Salkantay. So of course, once you reach the highest points, and then when you're sitting down, it's all nice and good, it's nice, all that effort is worthwhile. But while you're on that journey, right, there are so many times where I'm questioning, why am I here? Why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through this torture when I could have took the train and the bus and still reach Machu Picchu? There's one part of this journey, I did not take a photo. I should have took the photo. I'm still looking for a photo. Maybe someone may have put it up there. So this path, right, is the steepest part of the journey. It's not a very far distance, but it's very steep. And it's so steep that you can't just hike up, because we needed to cross that mountain to get over to the other side before we get to this photo. All right? It's so steep that you could not hike straight up. You need to hike this way. All right? And it's not so long. It's pretty much like this, and they call it kind of like the snake route. All right? It's so steep that every step you take, you will feel like you slip half a step. So double the effort. All right? Every time I looked up, I knew what the goal was to reach the top of that mountain, which didn't look that far away. All right? But every time I looked up, it felt like I've made no progress. because I'm taking one step up, I'm sliding half a step back. It's steep, thighs are burning, short of breath, and I just want to give up. And I'm asking myself, why am I doing this again? Right? But what were my options? A, continue. B, turn around and go back, which was a 3-hour hike back. So it wasn't much of an option. So now, suddenly, I knew what the goal was, but the goal was no longer motivating. Because every time I looked at it, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm nowhere close. All right? So the goal became demotivating. So what we all did collectively is, and this is what everybody who is not used to altitude, not used to hiking, did on that trip. So we stopped looking at the goal. We knew where we needed to go, but we stopped looking at the goal. We focused on looking down and taking that next step, and that next step, and that next step, one step at a time. And we stopped when we needed to stop. We took a break when we needed to take a break, but then we continued with the next step, knowing that if we continue with the next step, we will reach our destination. Okay, so obviously that's how we got to this point. And then, like I said, once you're at that peak, everything is forgotten, because this is the reward. Suddenly, all that pain, all that challenges, right, is forgotten. It's a thing of the past. And then we continue our journey. Remember, there's still another 4-hour hike, right, trek back to the next base camp. And then the feelings start all over again. Like, okay, what am I doing? Why am I here again? So this is motivation for you, all right? It comes in spikes. You can be highly motivated to take on that journey, but when that journey gets tough, what's going to keep you going is your consistency of effort. Because sometimes you cannot find the motivation to continue. You can look, you can try, but you're not going to find that motivation to continue at that point of time. But what's going to carry you through that time is your consistency. So what is consistency? Consistency is your routines, your systems, your habits, your actions that you have in place. Simply put, it is your non-negotiable items, your non-negotiable actions that will take place regardless of how you feel and external conditions. Right? And that's what the tortoise did. It knew it didn't have the upper hand. It knew that it's probably going to lose. Like, how do you run against a hare? Right? But it knew what it had to do, which was keep doing and finish the race. Because finishing the race was more important to the tortoise than it was to win the race. But in that process, because of consistency, the tortoise won the race. Okay, so I talked about motivation just now, and very briefly I mentioned that motivation is an emotion. All right? Emotions are described as a state of mind or a feeling that is associated to either a physical or psychological experience. Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit technical, it gets a little bit deep, but it is important for us to understand what drives us, the emotions that drive us. And there are a lot of different emotions. What you see here is just a few of the common emotions, but there is so many more emotions. In my first book, You Deserve Happiness, there's a simple exercise in there, which I'll share with you, but you can do it later on once you're home. Take about 30 seconds and try to write down as many emotions as you can remember. All right? It may sound easy, but most people can only come up between 5 to 10 emotions. But the fact is, there is so much more emotions. All right? So emotions affect our thoughts, our language, our actions, and our behavior. And motivation is an emotion. Just like rejection is an emotion. Right? Just like happiness is an emotion. Just like sadness, that's an emotion. All right? So emotions can be described as a state of mind or a feeling that is influenced by either a physical or a psychological experience. By the way, for those of you who want to take photos of this, please feel free to take photo. All this is for you all right? If you want to post this online, please feel free to post it. You want to take videos, it's also fine by me. But if you're doing any posting, just tag me, all right? And that's just it, all right? So feel free. So emotions can be described as a state of mind or feeling that is associated to either a physical or psychological experience. Physical experiences are experiences that we experience on the external. Say, for example, you go and watch a movie, all right? It could be a comedy, all right? You start laughing. It could be a romantic movie. You feel that sense of love or loss, depending where you are at in your love life. Right? You watch a thriller, you feel that excitement. You watch an action movie, adrenaline starts pumping. But these are external events that cause us to feel a certain way. We attend a kickoff event, which is high energy. We feel very motivated, right? Because we attended an physical event. Psychological experiences is what happens in our head, right? It's the thoughts that we choose to carry, and the thoughts that we choose to entertain, and the thoughts that we choose to dwell into. Right? Psychological experience is also our memories, past experiences, our beliefs, our values. And these are all things that can affect how we feel. I'll give you a simple example. You have an argument with a loved one in the morning before heading out to work. This argument is left unresolved. And now you have left for work and you are at work. But isn't it true? Almost all day long, that unresolved argument will pop back in your head every now and again. And each time it pops back, it takes you back to that point of that argument, and it triggers that same feelings that you felt. In actual fact, the more time you spend thinking about that argument, the more intense the emotion becomes, and it stirs up more thoughts like, how can that person say that? All right? It's not fair. I've done this, I've done that. It's unjust. And we get worked up all over again. All right? And that's a psychological experience. So, whether it's a physical experience or psychological experience, what we need to understand is this. All emotions require triggers. No emotion just appears out of the blue, all right? Something has to happen to trigger a certain emotion. Sometimes we are aware of the triggers, sometimes we are not aware of the triggers. But all emotions require triggers. There is one study that says something a little bit different though. And this is a study that says that our default state is happiness. All right? And that's why if we look at children, most children are just happy by nature. All right? And that's our default state. But because we pile up a lot of other things, we now layer our default state with different emotions. But if we clear away all that noise, all that junk, what we are left with is a state of happiness and peace. Yeah? But having said that, all emotions require triggers. So if you are feeling demotivated, the key is to now do what motivates you. If you are feeling sad, it's not about not feeling sad, it's about knowing what your triggers are for happiness, so that you can go and do the things that make you happy to trigger that emotion of happiness, which now cancels out the feeling of unhappiness. But the more time we spend around the triggers for unhappiness, the more intense that feeling of unhappiness becomes. So same works for motivation and demotivation. So this is how emotions work, and that is why, right, the emotion of motivation is unreliable. It is unreliable, because if motivation was reliable, none of us would need sales managers and directors to check in with us every now and again to see how are we doing and to give us that boost. If motivation was a reliable source, we would not need motivational speakers coming in to pump you up so that you can now go about with that boost of energy. Motivation is an unreliable source. Consistency of systems, habits, and routines, on the other hand, is what wins you the long game. Hence the saying, slow and steady wins the race. All right, so the cognitive triangle simply says our thoughts affects our feelings affects our actions. All right, and all three areas are interrelated to each other. So if we have negative thoughts, that will affect how we feel, and that will affect our actions. But if we have systems and habits and routines in the form of actions that are non-negotiables, that take place regardless of how we feel, guess what? That actions, that systems, that routines will now influence the way we feel. And it can become a trigger for positive feelings. Right, so that's how the cognitive triangle works. Okay, there's this thing called the novelty effect, right? And in sales, the novelty effect simply means this, right? Say, for example, this is kickoff. You attended a kickoff event, or you set yourself a new goal for this year, or you get a new product. You are taught a new script, a new methodology of selling. Okay, and for some, it's just New Year energy. You know, we all have that, okay, brand new year, we forget about last year and we'll get it done this year. So our energy is high, our motivation spikes. And, you know, we take action. We start seeing a little bit of results, you know, and we feel really good about it. And then, 1 week later, 2 weeks later, we move into phase 2. And phase 2 is called the dip in reality, or the reality dip. Results stop coming in. Rejections start piling up. You know, we're all in the business of sales. You may be wondering, like, Jit, but you're a speaker. What do you mean we are in the business of sales? But for me to stand in front here and speak, someone needs to buy my service first. So when I'm not speaking, I'm also constantly out there selling myself as a speaker, you know, to organizations. So I'm constantly in the business of sales. If you ask me, speaking is my second business. Right? But we are all in the business of sales, and we know for a fact, you know what's the global data closing date for sales across the board? Closing rate for sales, right? Across the board. This was done by HubSpot, and it's for sales regardless of industry, product, or service. All across the board is 29%. Meaning 7 out of 10 people will say no to you the first time you present something to them. Right? And most sales happen in this industry either in the 4th or 5th attempt. All right? So this is just stats. In the financial services industry, sometimes it's 9 no's before a yes, because it takes into account the number of times you present to the same people. You know? So yeah, it's not easy, but at the same time, it is data. It is how it is. It probably will be how it's going to be. So rejections is part and parcel of this industry. Rejections is part and parcel of the sales process. But when rejection starts coming in, remember, rejection is both an act and an emotion. The act of rejection is when a prospect, a client says no to whatever you're proposing to them. That's the act, and the act of rejection is their prerogative. They have the right to say no. Just like we have the right to say no when we are walking around shopping centers and bus stations, and then someone walks up to us and says, hey, would you like to sign up for this free HSBC credit card? Okay, I know, because I was one of that guys trying to ask people to sign up for HSBC credit cards, 10 years ago. Very challenging time. It was my first entry into how rejections can take a toll on your confidence. Because before that, I was a flight attendant with Singapore Airlines for 8 years. I had no fear of talking to people. In fact, I still feel I've got good people relation skills. But having said that, 3 days into trying to ask people to sign up for a free credit card, I felt so demotivated, so worthless, because I could not sell a free credit card that required no money, that gave rewards and benefits to the users. Right? I saw how nasty people can be, how unkind people can be, how Sometimes, even though in a sea of people, I felt invisible. But it was my entry into the power of this feeling of rejection. Because the act of rejection is a prerogative. It's a right everybody has. But the act of rejection will trigger the emotion of rejection from within. The act of rejection is hardly ever personal. But the feeling of rejection will feel really personal. And therein again lies the second problem. When we take this rejection personally, we fail to realize that the prospect said no to the product, but instead we think the prospect said no to us. Sometimes they said no to us. That's true. But most time, they are not saying no to us. Maybe they're not ready. Maybe they don't have enough information yet. That just means they need to be given more information. Their convincer rate needs to be hit. That's the other thing in buyer psychology. Each and every one of us have a convincer rate. And the higher the ticket is, the more convincing is needed. Unless someone really knows what they want, then it's easy. But if they don't know it's something that they need, their convincer rate is much higher. Okay, so coming back to the novelty effect. Novelty effect simply means this. In the beginning, motivation is high because of an external stimulus. But when that novelty dies off, when reality hits in, motivation will fade. That's why it is said, in times of demotivation, it is not the skills to sell that disappear, but it is the will to sell. When motivation fades, the will to sell disappears. The will to sell disappears, guess what? Performance drops. We take a dip, all right? Silence starts kicking in, all right? Doubt starts growing. And we start questioning our abilities, we start questioning our capabilities, we start asking, why are we doing this again? There's so much of easier jobs out there. I could just be paid a fixed amount of money, 9 to 5, and then whether or not I do the job, I still get paid. This thought starts coming in. Some have done that before. They knew the pain of doing that, the unfulfillment of doing that. They leave, they come, they join this industry, but yet during the tough time, they start thinking back like, wow, life was good before. Some leave, go back, and then realize that, oh my goodness, life is terrible. But it happens, right? Because our emotions affect our thoughts. Right? So, reality fades, the reality dips, rejection starts appearing, results get delayed, silence increases. Now, results dip. And then, there's only two paths that you can take on after this. And that's phase 3. Either, all right, you continue dipping, all right, because you are demotivated and you could not find that new spark of motivation. If you find a new spark of motivation, performance will rise again. It'll just reset to this, you'll go up again. But if you cannot find that new spark of motivation, if your manager cannot get through to you, your director cannot get through to you, I cannot get through to you, you attend Tony Robbins' seminar, Tony Robbins cannot get through to you, then you're... Yes. I had a different word in mind, but I think I'm so glad you said your word first, because my word would not have been appropriate. But yes, habis. All right? Then you cannot find that spark of motivation. Path B is when you rely on your systems, your habits, your routines, your non-negotiable actions to stabilize your emotions and, more importantly, stabilize your results. So now my question to you is this. What are your systems that you have in place for yourself? What are your habits? What are your routines? What are your non-negotiable action steps every day? Do you have them or do you not? And these are questions that you have answers to. And you don't even need to answer me, but you need to be aware of this. Are you relying on motivation to hit your goals this year, or are you relying on your systems? Because systems is tangible. Systems will allow you to be consistent regardless of how you feel. These are non-negotiable items. Okay, remember that term. Non-negotiable items. Because if you negotiate with your action steps, guess what? Okay, you are the one in your way of achieving your goals. Because isn't it true, no matter how you're feeling, you can still make appointments, you can still call people, you can still meet people, you can still present. Instead of relying on the days you're feeling good to meet people. Well, because if you rely on emotions, it's unreliable. Because a lot of things happen in the external that will affect how we feel. Okay, so what are your systems? So that's the novelty effect. When the novelty dies off, what you're left with is either your systems or nothing. And my advice is start looking into what are the systems that you have so that you remain consistent. The other thing that happens is this, all right? It's a break in momentum. So we talked about the novelty effect when rejection appears, right? Rejection appears, rejection breaks the momentum, because when you feel rejected, suddenly it breaks your momentum because you are focused on that rejection, okay? But what else can break your momentum, all right? What else can break your momentum? And this is another question you need to ask yourself. If you think about the tortoise and the hare story, what broke the hare's momentum? The hare was ahead. It knew it was going to win. No way the tortoise was going to catch up. If the hare kept running, the hare would have won. And isn't it true, after winning the race, the hare could have came back to that lavender field and chilled and did whatever he wanted to do? But the hare chose to stop and take a break first because the hare was ahead. So think about your own experiences. How many of you have ever set a goal for this whole year to achieve it? 3 months into the year, you are well ahead of your goals. You're like, wow, half of my targets have been achieved. I have 9 more months left. It's a sure thing. I'm definitely going to get it. I've worked hard these 3 months. Maybe I should take a break first. Enjoy myself a little bit because I'm so far ahead. Okay? And this is a break in momentum. Because taking a break is okay if you still have your daily non-negotiable items taking place in the background, if you're still consistent. But if you take a complete break, what happens is you break momentum. You do not plan to sleep, but you might end up sleeping, just like the hare. And that's what happened to the hare. The hare felt it deserved that break because it was far ahead. So it said, I will stop. Tortoise is far behind. All right, I will play. So it played. And then it got tired. It said, I will sit, I will rest. And it slept. And when it woke up, it could not find the same level of motivation, could not find the same level of energy, because when momentum breaks, we need that spark to reignite that flame from within us. Okay? For those who drive cars, especially manual cars. I grew up learning how to drive manual cars. All right? These days, all is automatic, but it still happens with the same concept, which is the car always starts on the first gear. And then progressively we change gear and we cruise in the 5th gear. But if at some point we come to a stop, right, we cannot move at cruising gear again. We have to drop back to gear 1 to give that push before we progress to cruising. So that is how momentum works as well. When we are riding the momentum, okay, momentum builds over time. We can just cruise, okay? Results, they compound. Energy is sustained. You can accelerate, you can maintain your direction. But the moment we break momentum, what happens is it dips. And once it dips, the only way to ignite this momentum again is we need a spark. And if we don't find that spark, habis. Okay, that's the key here. All right. So, at this stage, if you look at this, the momentum break can happen because of rejections. It can happen because of delayed results. You have spent months and months and months working on one client, but the client is still not ready to commit. You know, delayed results. You know the result is coming, but you want it to come right now, right? And because of that, the momentum may break because you're so focused on one, but you forget about the rest. Okay? It could be a lack of recognition, right? So that silence increases because you're not being recognized for your effort, both by clients or by colleagues or whatever, awards, you know. So all this creeps in. Or you may decide that, you know what, you are so far ahead, you're going to allow distractions to creep in, you know, and because of that, you break momentum and then it dips. But if you have systems in place, if you have your routines, you have your actions, and you have your day-to-day non-negotiable items to carry you, then when motivation comes, right, as and when they come, it will spike your performance. But when motivation disappears, you fall back to your systems. You don't allow yourself to dip all the way to wait for that next spark to pick up again. You just fall back to your systems. And your systems will carry you consistently throughout the year. And when you find that next spark of motivation, guess what? Your performance will increase again. But it will always fall back to your level of your systems. And this is what I want you all to think about. While my talk is about motivation, I think by now you would have realized that actually I'm telling you that motivation is useless. It's good, right? It's good when it comes, but it's not going to work all year round if you rely purely on motivation. Unless every week you attend a Tony Robbins seminar. If you can afford it, it's fantastic. You know, if you have not been to a Tony Robbins seminar, I don't know how anyone can walk out of that 5 days feeling demotivated. Even if you don't learn anything, that energy of 2,000 people jumping up and down for 12 hours a day is so contagious. You will just feel like you can take on the world. You know, so if you can do that every week, fantastic. Then you can rely on motivation and you'll be very fit. All right? But for most of us, it's not a viable option. So because of that, we need our systems, right? Yes, sir.
Can I ask you some questions?
Sure, you can. How much time do you have? Perfect.
I mean, if let's say we design triggers that will trigger certain pleasurable emotion to keep us motivated at regular interval, will that enhance the system that you are saying?
Absolutely, because that itself is a system.
Promo incentive program.
Yeah, that itself, that itself is a system. That means you have defined. So a system simply means, right, it's a logical flow of things that need to happen in order to produce a certain result. Okay? So yeah, if your system, you know, and you have the system for demotivation, that whenever you feel demotivated, right, this is your 3 triggers. Yeah, 3 triggers that is going to reignite your motivation, and you clearly know what they are, and you utilize them, then you will spike that motivation again, for sure. So that's what I mean by systems.
Intentional.
But intentional. But I'm telling you what the hard part of this is going to be. Self-awareness. That's where most people struggle with. All right? Having that measure of self-awareness that I am demotivated and I need to trigger my motivation. It's a trained thing. It's not impossible. But it's got to be a conscious effort in the beginning to catch ourselves. And it only happens when we are being honest with ourselves. All right. So I've talked about this in another talk, which I will be delivering next week, but I'll give you a slight preview with that. I think some of you are attending next week's talk as well. Yes? All right. All attending. So which means you will see me again next week. Topic will be different. All right. You won't be hearing the tortoise and the hare story again. I'll come up with some other story. But in that talk, a small preview, one of the things I am going to speak about is about accountability. And what that means is holding yourself accountable. So let me ask you this question, all right? Just as a preview for next week. How many of you, all right, speak to yourself every day intentionally? When you wake up and when you sleep, yeah? Speak to yourself. And that's what holding yourself accountable means. Right? Before going to bed, look at yourself in the mirror. All right? Really, put on the hat of the manager, and the person in the mirror is the person that you are working with. And ask yourself, what was your performance today? What was your goals for today? What was your targets for today? Did you hit your target? Right? And be hard on yourself. Did you hit your target? And if the answer is, I didn't hit my targets, question, why didn't you hit your targets? Did you stick to your systems? Did you stick to your actions? Did you stick to your routines? And if the answer is yes, then it's fine. But the answer is, no, I did not. And the question is, why did you not stick to your routines? Why did you not stick to your habits, your systems? Who are you shortchanging? And these are hard questions that you have to ask yourself. Not the manager has to ask you, not the director has to ask you, not me, because you know why? When we ask, it gives that spike of motivation, novelty effect. When we leave, that leaves with it. But if you make it a habit to ask yourself every day and hold yourself accountable, you know what? Your results will change. Yeah, so very good question. Thank you for asking that. But that itself is a system. So coming back to momentum, right? I want to ask you this question. What are your momentum breakers? Right? What are your momentum breakers? All learning only begins with self-awareness, and all transformation also begins with self-awareness. If we are not aware of what makes us successful or what holds our success back, then we can never change and transform. So my question to you now is this. What are your momentum breakers? And let's do this. We have a bit of time. So let's do a brainstorm. Okay? Shout out anything and I'm just going to write it here. Okay? What are your momentum breakers? Handphone. Okay. Handphone. A bit more specific. What about the handphone? Social media. TikTok. Okay. TikTok. And social media. Holiday. Holidays. What else?
Cold call from insurance agent.
Cold call, that's your momentum breaker. That means when another insurance agent calls you. Okay. Right, come on. Momentum breakers. We all have this. Right? What are your momentum breakers? Think about it. What distracts you at times? What stops you from your non-negotiable items? Yeah?
The hair.
Nap. What else? Not enough sleep. That's a big one. Huh? All right? And so many people underestimate the importance of sleep and rest. Because you know what also affects our emotions? Our sleep. How rested we are. And it's not just about the little naps in between in the afternoon. It's not even about getting that 7 hours of sleep. It's about understanding that there is a period that our body repairs and heals itself. And this is the night sleep.
But you say at night we must talk to ourselves, then get us.
Good point.
I thought the whole night.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Because it can happen. Because that honest conversation can work ourselves up, right? Especially if it's something that we are not achieving, it's not a good conversation, then it's going to affect, which means now the conversation needs to happen in the morning. So that you're fired up in the morning. And don't do it at night, because that's going to affect your sleep. So have a good night's sleep, wake up in the morning, and then have that conversation. Okay, how was your performance yesterday? Suddenly you'll wake up, because you will wake up. And then when you realize that, shit, I shortchanged myself yesterday, I'm going to make up for it today. So have that conversation. Yeah, thank you for that question. All right? So, sleep, right? Night sleep. And there is a period in that night sleep. Of course, different research will tell you different things, but night sleep and consistent hours in that night sleep is when your body heals and recovers itself. If you're sleeping during the day, it's good naps to energize you, but healing is not happening. Repair is not happening. For the late nighters, right, those who feel that they are most active at night, what you're compromising on is rest and sleep. Okay, when I used to be a flight attendant before with Singapore Airlines, by the way, I was a flight steward for almost 8 years with Singapore Airlines. So for those of you who find me a little bit familiar but never seen me, maybe I served you a cup of coffee or tea before. Right? Maybe. And for those who did not see me on flight, then I could have been the HSBC guy. Right? Hopefully you said yes to me. But anyway, when I was flying for Singapore Airlines, right, 12 hours of sleep was so easy. My head hits the pillow, immediate sleep, 12 hours minimum. All right, my record was 16 hours, but 12 to 14, so easy. But I never woke up feeling energized, feeling rested. It was always a state of tiredness. And that's because when you're a flight attendant, your body is perpetually jet lagged. In your 20s, you don't feel it. But that doesn't mean the body is not tired, because our recovery is a little bit faster, and we can, we can fight through it. We can brush it off, but the body is still tired. And there is this thing called owed sleep, right? And the body is keeping account of owed sleep, right? And it wants to try to catch up. Problem is also, because the body is perpetually jet lagged, sometimes I'm sleeping in the morning, sometimes I'm sleeping at night, sometimes it's afternoon because it's a different time zone. But the body comes back to the Singapore time zone, right? And it's like, okay, today is not a night sleep, After a few years, the body doesn't know what's your time zone. And when your body doesn't know what your time zone is, when is it going to allocate the time to repair? It doesn't know when to repair the body. And that's the problem. And that is why, after a certain number of years, right, flight attendants start to age very fast. And also, a lot of flight attendants have a lot of health issues. Some even really, I've known of people, right? It's very sad, but I've known of people who dropped dead, like literally. There's one friend who, having lunch or dinner in Hong Kong, right? And just dropped dead, heart attack. Just like that, no history before. It happens. Right? There are people who just don't wake up from sleep overseas, and then all the crew are waiting to leave, but one person didn't show up. They go knocking on the door. Finally, housekeeping and the hotel open the door, and they're just dead. All right? That's one of the reasons why, at the age of 30, it contributed to my decision to leave. I'm like, I cannot go on like this. But yeah, so coming back, the body needs to rest, it needs to repair itself in order for you to recover. And if you are denying yourself of that, it is not going to help your emotional state. And when your emotional state is not at its best, and if you don't have systems in place for consistent actions, what's the word? Habis. Okay, so come back. Not enough sleep. What else? Come, what else? What are your momentum breakers? And be honest. Okay, I'll ask you a better question. All right? What are your friends' momentum breakers? You have seen your colleagues. Shopping, okay. Okay, come, tell me about your friends. Tell me about your colleagues. What are their momentum breakers? Because you can observe. Too much alcohol. Alcohol, how to spell alcohol? I forgot. Okay, too much drinking, huh? See? What the world of technology has done, we forget spelling. Okay, what else? Too much drinking. What are momentum breakers? Come on, a little bit more. Let's get the list up to 10. Falling sick. Okay, falling sick. Sick of working. Yeah. Okay, what else? 2 more. Let's get 2 more. Momentum breaker. Gossiping.
Don't gossip about alcohol.
By the way, do guys gossip?
Yeah.
Ah, right, we do. All Gossiping, here's the other thing, right? We always think that gossiping is just about, wow, what other people are doing, what's going on, other people, yeah, that's a form of gossiping, right? But there's also a different form of gossiping where we are comparing who has the worst off day, all right? And who had a worse off client, all right? That's a form of gossiping. And remember, our thoughts will affect our emotions. When we make a habit to gather and complain, right? What happens is this, it becomes a competition of who has a worse off day, who has a worse off client, who, has a worse off results. And human nature, deep down, we are all very competitive, okay? If you tell me you have a worse off day, I will prove to you I have a worse off day. Right? Because we are competitive in nature. Right? So now the question is this, is it wrong to complain? Also no, because we need that outlet. If we don't have that outlet, then we keep it all inside, and what we keep inside will pile up and eventually explode. So now you're wondering, Jit, so complain or don't complain? And the answer is complain with intention. All right? Meaning, if you create a support group, all right, which is your outlet group, for you to talk about, these things that is boggling you or pulling you down, but the intent also is to collectively find a solution. Like for example, I did this presentation to my client. After all this, the client still said no. I'm very upset. Why must the client say that? But anyway, what do you think I can do better for the next client? Shift that conversation to positive with intention for solutions. Then it's fine because we all need that outlet. But if it's just a competition of who has a worse day, then I think it's pointless because that's what's going on in all the coffee shops. All right? Just sit at a coffee shop, stay in silence, but just listen to all the conversations around. It's always a complaint about who is having a worse off day. Okay? So we need to change that. All right, last one.
Client postpone appointment.
Client postpone appointment. Fantastic. Okay, so 10 items here, okay? And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more momentum breakers, right? But your homework is very simple. Take a photo of this, go back and figure out, next time if any one of this happens to you, what can you do? Remember self-awareness, right? Ask yourself, what can you do? That means, if social media is a momentum breaker, what can you do? Easiest answer, delete TikTok. Second answer, without having to delete, all right, set time limit. All right? If setting time limit doesn't work, call your parents, ask them to put parental lock. Yeah, because we do that for children, right? Yeah, but yeah, you got to know what are your momentum breakers, and then you got to deal with your momentum breakers. Okay? And that's the key here. So think about all this. Remember this. If I'm going to leave you with one thing today, right, and if this is the only thing that you're going to remember, it's going to be this: you are responsible for the results that you want. And all learning and all transformation begins with self-awareness. If we are not aware of how we succeed, right, then we cannot succeed. If we are not aware of what pulls us down, we also cannot succeed. Because unconsciously, there may be a lot of things that pull us down, that breaks our momentum. And when momentum breaks, and if we don't have systems, it's very hard to reignite those systems. Okay? So, short story, simple message. Consistency beats motivation. That's my message to you today. 3 words. Consistency beats motivation. When you have systems in place, and I say systems meaning same actions, right? Same time, same volume. Volume here meaning the same amount of energy and dedication and commitment that you put into your non-negotiable items, then regardless of rejections or emotional noise meaning boredom, doubt, and silence. Regardless of these 2 things, your routine will hold. Your systems will continue. Okay? And this is what you need to do. So, One of the questions now may be, all right, so Jit, you talk so much about systems, all right, what systems can we now introduce to ourselves? What systems can we have? Where do we start? And the answer to that question is, don't ask me. And I'll tell you why, okay? A room full of practitioners here. I'm not a practitioner, all right? Which means I can tell you theoretically what to do, but I have never applied it in your industry with your product and your service. Which means I don't really know if the systems I'm going to teach you will work or not. It's theoretical. Theoretically, it's sound. But on the ground, it may not work. But who has systems that you know will work? Fellow practitioners. Ask them. Look at the ones who are doing well in your industry. Look at the producers. Look at your managers. Look at your directors. You know, they are there for a reason. Talk to them. Ask them. What are your routines? What are your habits? What are your systems? What time do you wake up every morning? What is the first thing that you do when you wake up? What are the 10 things in your to-do list that you clear before 10 a.m.? How many people do you meet a day? What time do you meet the first person? Ask them all these questions. And the question is, have you asked anyone these questions before? And if you have not, start asking. All right? Will everyone give you an answer? Probably not. There are going to be some who's like, this is my trade secret. I'm not going to share with you. Fine. What do you do next? Go and look for the next person. That's it. Because if you really want to find out, someone will share with you. And trust me, I've been doing work in this industry for a long time. And I've heard not just a lot of speakers, I've heard a lot of practitioners who take stage to share, and practitioners are always more than willing to share strategies. Question is, are you utilizing these strategies? Okay, so consistency beats motivation, right? Your systems is what you should fall back to. When motivation comes, it spikes performance, all well and good. Motivation fades, it must drop back to your systems. Have your non-negotiable items that you have to do every day. Do not get in the way of your own success. All right? Have systems. If you don't know what to do, you don't know where to start, speak to a producing practitioner. All right? Could be in your team, could be in the company, could be from other companies. Doesn't matter. All right? Learn. Because if there is a need to learn, the knowledge is there for you. All right? So, to close it off, the tortoise and the hare. All right? Why did the hare lose? It was not because of a lack of capabilities. It was not because of a lack of confidence. It was not because of a lack of abilities. It was because the hare allowed a negotiation with comfort. And comfort took priority over finishing the task at hand, staying focused. All right, so with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for having me here today. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been an honor. I'm going to see all of y'all next week again. I've got a few copies of my book here, The Sales Rejection Paradox. If any of you want it, you can get it from me. If not, you can also get it from Kinokuniya if you want. It's in all the Kinokuniyas. All right. And lastly, if you are posting anything, please tag me. This is my Instagram. With that, thank you once again. Anas, back to you.